And it's interesting that you mentioned Jefferson Morley because he is first on my list. We're going into your book now, and I'm going to go into specific questions now. I'm going to be quoting from page 9 on your book, which is in the Jefferson Morley section. But the assassination of the president was an intelligence failure. The U.S. government should have had sufficient information to prevent that from happening. The government failed. Where did the failure originate? It originated in the CIA. It was the malfeasance of the CIA that caused the wrongful death of the president, whether Oswald did it alone or he was part of the conspiracy. I'd like for you to go into that a little bit and respond to what he said there.
Right. I mean, it's I think it's a well-documented fact now that the CIA lied about everything they knew. Richard Helms lied about everything they knew as far as who Oswald was. John Newman's done a lot of work in that area, as a lot of people know, and even a lot of the lone gunman researchers acknowledge this same fact. One of the things I said in my speech at Lancer is earlier, or a couple of years ago around there, the Barger report from the CIA came out, and they said that John McCone withheld evidence from the Warren Commission because they thought they had enough evidence that Oswald already did it. And we know that a trial shouldn't work that way. But the CIA back then in context, kind of their own entity and their own power, and they didn't really have a lot they had to answer to. And so I think what Mr. Morley's saying there is even if there's not a conspiracy, it's time that the CIA at least admitted what we've known for years, is that they knew who Oswald was. They had a file on him. There were certain people in the mole hunting division under James Angleton. They knew who he was, and it was their job to know who he was, even if they didn't. They should have known who he was with him going to Russia and swearing allegiance to them. Then when he comes back, the FBI knows who he is. They should have communicated this too. And the fact that Oswald is there on November 22nd on the parade route that the president's going by, who's openly supported America's enemies, and the fact that he shoots the president and everyone says, well, we don't even know who this guy is, that just wasn't the case. And the real interesting question is, why couldn't they just come out and say that? And it could be because of their pride, because they don't want to admit that they were wrong, and it could be because they were hiding something. But the buck stops with them. They should have known. If they didn't know, our intelligence community was a huge failure to the president and what they were supposed to do in collecting intelligence. And if they did know, which we know they knew, and they didn't report it, then that was a really heinous act. And ultimately, if they knew and didn't act on Oswald or have surveillance, which in Mexico City they should have known even more right before the assassination, they covered all that up, then the buck stops with them. It's an intelligence failure, and they failed the president and their responsibility. And the greater tragedy is, because they never would admit it, we don't even know how much better they've gotten at protecting the president. We have no idea.
And over on page 20 of your book, Anthony Summers echoes that same sentiment. He says there certainly was a failure of the intelligence agencies across the board.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was. And I don't understand why you have to be a conspiracy theorist to believe that. If I take any issue with some lone gunman researchers, it's that, we can't say that, and we shouldn't attack the CIA's credibility because that's un-American. And I think it's very American to hold people in power accountable to the people. And it was a failure across the board because the FBI failed. J. Edgar Hoover was very concerned with that when the Warren Commission was started up, about protecting his image, making sure that he tried to cover things up, that the FBI had any contact with Oswald. And these rumors that Oswald had been an informant and Jack Ruby had been an informant. And, just pulling a card from the late Harold Weisberg, you have a president murdered in the middle of the street on a sunny American day, and you have the most powerful man in the intelligence community or in the criminal law community in J. Edgar Hoover. And, how could he let this happen? under his nose. How could the CIA let this happen? Well, the only thing to do is to close up shop and say Oswald did it alone. And even if he did do it alone, that's not the way it should have worked. So I think when Kennedy was killed, what's not brought up a lot is a lot of our institutions were exposed for how many flaws they had and how weak they were. And just like after 9/11, a lot was exposed. And, I'm to play the devil's advocate, even in our own life, when things happen and we're tested, we don't really know where our flaws are, where we're made of. So that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in the intelligence community murdered President Kennedy, because we're human beings, no institution is going to be perfect. So human beings are complacent, and once we get complacent, we're open to making mistakes. And boy, they made a lot of them with the president, but where they really made the mistake was afterward in the way they responded. That's where the intelligence community really failed the American people, and have continued to this day. They responded in a way that was arrogant, and in a way that was, it was really none of our business what they knew, or none of our business what they knew about President Kennedy's assassination, or his assassin, or the assassin's assassin. And that's okay at first. I understand the whole thing. They don't have to tell the American people everything. I don't want them to tell me everything if it's going to protect certain things in national security. I understand that. But after 20 years, 30 years, 40, and now 50-something years, to continue to do it, there's just no excuse.
Well, and David Talbot goes a little bit further than that, even in his theory, and I want to present that theory. On page 24, David Talbot says, I believe Allen Dulles was a key member of that group who plotted against the president. I believe he used those associates of his in the national security world to greenlight the assassination, and I believe it also involved certain elements within the CIA that were still loyal to him. That's a very plausible theory. What response do you have to that?
Well, Mr. Talbot's he's a great researcher and a great author. And as far as his theory, in that's it's very interesting. I don't know how much I could say as far as did Allen Dulles pull a team together in Dallas to have him killed. I don't have the evidence to say that 100%. I think even Mr. Talbot would admit if he went to court, he didn't have the full evidence to admit that. But it certainly is questionable because of the way they acted afterward. And I've always told this to people. If the government and Allen Dulles and a hit team had wanted to pull the murder of the president off, you surely wouldn't know it, and they surely wouldn't leave paper around that said they did it. And you surely wouldn't know the assassins' names or where it came from or anything like that. So just because, let's say it was Oswald there doing the shooting, just because that's the case doesn't mean there's not a conspiracy. It doesn't mean that there's not something behind it. And, I don't slam people like Mr. Dulles or Mr. Morley or people like Mr. Summers who believe in these theories, because, honestly, this is the government's fault for the way they reacted. So everything's on the table now. And the downside of that is you have some wacky theories out there, like aliens and the Catholic Church and all of this stuff. But it is, to me, it's not the people's fault for coming up with theories. It's the government's fault and the way they responded. A lot of people don't realize that early on they really had an opportunity to squash a lot of this, and they really blundered it. And
indeed. In fact, he goes on the next page, David Talbot goes on to say there was a massive cover-up from the very beginning. The FBI warned Kenneth O'Donnell not to say what he truly saw. Yeah, and Kenneth O'Donnell, who really had no stake in it. We know he told Tip O'Neill at a dinner, according to Tip O'Neill's book, that, he heard a shot from the grassy knoll, and that Tip O'Neill said, well, you didn't testify to the Warren Commission that way. And he said, well, I just didn't want to cause any more pain for the family, and they told me that I had to be imagining things because it couldn't have happened that way.
And it's really a travesty, because if that's the truth, to sway someone's testimony is wrong. And if they did that in a court of law, it would be thrown out if they found out the police were swaying someone's testimony to be a certain way. So the truth is we know there was a cover-up in the Warren Commission. I mean, we know that because even people from the Warren Commission have said years later, like David Slauson, some of these people, Burt Griffith, Judge Burt Griffith, they've admitted that they were stonewalled by the CIA. They admitted they were lied to by the FBI. They admitted they didn't trust J. Edgar Hoover. And we know they did it again to the House Select Committee, and on and on and on. So was there a cover-up? I don't think that's a question. I think the question is, what did the cover-up involve? And either way, if you say, well, the cover-up involved them covering up the assassination that the government actually did, a murder themselves, or if you say, well, they were just covering their butts as far as who got exposed and they were just hiding information, either way, there's really no excuse. Obviously, the murder would be worse, but the other one is just as bad, too. So it's not...
As we further explore that, I'll come to some more things that David Talbot had to say, but first I want to welcome a caller from California. Hello, California. You're on the line.
Oh, this is Ted. I was just listening, actually.
Ted, if you have a question or a comment, go for it.
No, I was just going to listen unless that was a problem, because it was the only way I could get the show.
If you do decide you want to make a comment or a question, feel free. Right now I'm going to explore David Talbot's comment on page 26, Jake. He says CIA's cover-up strategy, this part of the cover-up was run by the head of counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton. He used disinformation. He consistently flooded the public arena with lies and misleading information in order to confuse and befuddle the American people until they just threw up their hands in despair and concluded, we will never know the truth. He goes on to say another couple of paragraphs down, of course, power conspires together. That's how power works. Europeans are fully aware of this, but Americans seem naive. We tend to still believe what we're taught in the classroom, but older civilizations know that power kills to stay in power. Power conspires and does terrible things. There is the government-elect, and then there are the real powers in control. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think David Talbot makes some good points. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I'll say hey to Ted real quick. He's a great guy. But secondly, I think, David Sheem in the opening of his book makes a similar remark about how the Europeans automatically knew Jack Ruby was probably tied to somebody and they considered it a conspiracy. That in and of itself doesn't make it a conspiracy. But, power definitely corrupts. And when America was founded, that was one of the big things that they wanted to do, was to prevent abusive leaders from gaining too much power like they had in England and enforcing certain things on the people. And that's why the whole government system in America, which was originally a republic, was made to prevent that, from power conspiring with power and dominating and things like that. I definitely think, because I've done work in profiling, I definitely think that's very true. And it's true even in a micro sense in all of us, that